Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our first of four series for our summer program, Black Women in Publishing. My name is Donna Hill. I'm the Executive Director for the Center of Black Literature, which is hosting this wonderful event. And my co-host and partner in crime is our Director of Operations and Literary Programs, Amber Magruder. And we are thrilled to have as our very first guest, for the very first time that we're doing this, Abby West. Abby West is the Vice President, Editorial Director for Amistad imprint at Harper Collins. She's responsible for the editorial direction of the nearly 40-year-old imprint, including the full list of Zora Neale Hurston books, which I teach every semester, such as Their Eyes Were Watching God and the newly published The Life of Herod the Great. Recent books she's edited include Tony at Random by Dana A. Williams, My Father's House, An Ode to America's Longest Serving Black Congressman by John Conyers III, and I'm Highly Percent Sure by Carolyn Wanga. Abby was previously Director of Inclusive Content Programming at Audible and co-founded the Black Employee Network and Audible ERG. She is a recovering journalist, so we definitely have to talk about that to see what she means by that, whose years at prominent media organizations such as Audible, Essence, Entertainment Weekly, and People have given her a love of stories that explore, empower, and celebrate the narratives that can often go untold. She also serves on the board of the Children's Law Center of New York. Welcome, Abby. Thank you so much for being here with us. How are you?
I'm wonderful, and thank you so much for having me, Donna. It was a pleasure always to talk with you and to address this amazing crowd. It's so great to see everybody on the screen. I know a couple of people here too, which is fantastic. We've done some work together, so it's just a wonderful time. Thank you.
Great. So to start us off, the purpose of this series was, of course, to highlight those, Black women in the industry and what they do for the industry. And our audience, for the most part, wants to know some of the inner workings and how to break in. Everybody doesn't want to be a writer, but they may love reading and editing. And what are some of the other avenues that they can get into? So, if you could start us off a little bit about what was your journey to where you got to where you are? What was some of your background, and how did you climb the ladder to vice president?
Uh, it's a great question because my path, my professional life has been very circuitous and very, I say sometimes serendipitous. I've been following what interests me from the beginning and had kind of no idea that it would land here. But it all made sense when it did. I was the girl who moved to New York at 4 from Trinidad and was finding herself mainly in books. I read everything. I was an avid reader and loved to write, but writing as an author and writing books was not something that was accessible at all to my family. You were going to be a nurse, or you're going to find a job, and that's something that made sense to the family. So I translated that to becoming a journalist because I could use my love of words and my passion for language and channel it into a medium that made sense as a job and also tapped into my curiosity. So it served me well. I was a daily newspaper reporter at first. It's a couple of newspapers in Connecticut, and that fostered took the introvert girl and made her be able to ask insightful questions because it was for a greater good. It was the beginning of me tapping into a larger purpose outside of myself. And then went from daily newspapers to magazines. Was at Entertainment Weekly, People Magazine, and Essence Magazine, where with various editorial roles, from reporter to editor in different editor roles to executive editor at Essence for a while. And then again, I kept raising my hand at every turn, going, I wanted to learn more or do something different. And I realized by that point, it was less the medium than just how the ability to tell stories in different ways, to get information, talk to passionate, engaged audiences, of which I was one. I at that point was still very mainstream and had unfortunately been really focused on staying very mainstream, but it's an interesting thing that the higher I got in mastheads, the more I realized how important it was, especially when I was continuing to be either an only or one of a few, or you're in those spaces all the time. You realize that I don't want to speak for all Black people, but I do need to speak up, and was grateful and thankful that I had spaces where non-Black people were seeking insight to the information they were disseminating and how they were gathering it. But that was an evolving thing for me as well. So I ended up at, again, because my interests started to grow at Audible in the late 2017 or so. And again, just kept raising my hand and wanting to know more. So throughout this time, I was gaining leadership skills as well as contacts and interests. At various points, I was very much publishing industry adjacent. And then, especially with Audible, at Entertainment Weekly, too, I was covering books. I knew all the players, did a lot of the reading. So understood the space, but was not in the buildings. And then I was in another space with Audible where I was handling pitches and curating content and talking to authors in very engaged ways and working with the content creators as well as the acquisitions team who was buying the audio from traditional publishers, from print publishers to do the audio experiences. So getting some more behind the scenes insights into how the business of it works. And that's something I'm to really be interested to talk to folks about because I want us to be very clear about the difference between being a writer and being a published author and the business of being an author. They are two
Mhm.
different things. They can overlap,
Yes.
but you have to be clear. So all of those things were going on. And when this role became available, I realized that it was everything my career had been leading up to. It was in large part too that I had worked with major brands, and I consider Amistad a brand, passionate brands that are key to their audience, key to their communities, from Entertainment Weekly to Essence. Um, and it was important to me to both do the editorial work, but also to make sure that it was something that stayed vibrant and relevant externally and within the corporate spaces that they live in, because that's the other leg of this. It's a business that I also have to make sure is staying on track while doing the other work. So it's fun. It's a fun business. It's a long-winded way to get there. As you can tell, very circuitous. It's not the straightforward path. I'm not telling anyone to
Yeah.
follow my path, but I do believe when you follow what's interesting to you and lead into your skill sets and your interests, things align.
Hmm. So talk to us a little bit about Amistad, what Amistad's mission is, why it's important, and why it's an imprint of a larger of the larger company itself, Harper Collins.
So it was developed by Calvin Harris, like almost 40 years ago, right? Coming out of Howard University as a smaller sort of initiative, and how it became an imprint is really, again, in the same time span as Toni Morrison. There's an understanding that there was a lack of addressing the African American audience, right, and how that could be done. So he was very focused on having the the meat and might behind of a larger publishing house to be able to do that. Right now, actually, I have to always reworked our mission statement beginning of the year, and I have to pull it up because I want to read it properly.
Mhm.
Because what we want to be able to always do is lean into the legacy of the work that was done before us, right? So Amistad Books is the most respected and storied imprint dedicated to publishing Black voices. And for nearly 40 years, we've been devoted to honoring the legacy of Black literature, amplifying the bold and unapologetic voices of today's storytellers, and paving the way for inspiring Black-centered stories of the diaspora. Our authors celebrate and illuminate Black history, shape the culture, and enrich our bodies, spirits, and imagination through fiction and nonfiction that expand our narratives in new and surprising ways. So the catalog reflects the breadth of Blackness from the Pulitzer, some of which you'll see behind me, from the Pulitzer Prize winning The Known World by Edward P. Jones to the seminal classic Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston to Just As I Am by Cicely Tyson to Hustle Harder, Hustle Smarter by Curtis 50 Cent Jackson. Range, right? So Amistad books illuminate, inspire, and imagine the past, present, and future of Blackness. I wanted to say, oh, that mouthful, because it's important to us and for me, vision that I'm the fourth editorial director in the almost 40 years. And
Wow.
each of us have brought something to the table, have met the moment at that time, brought our own lens to what the work means at that moment. And what I'm trying to do is incorporate all of that and look forward. So that mission statement for me has been really important as a sort of North Star as we acquire and publish books going forward. We're in a really, I don't need to tell everybody here, interesting moment in time. And when you see books that show up and you're like, oh, wow, it's like they knew what was going to go on. You want to have books that will resonate because they're resonating on a human level, no matter what's going on, but also be really clear about what world, because publishing is a 18 to 24 month yeah, 24 month sort of lead time. In a year and a half, we're sort of future casting what the marketplace, what an audience like yourself is going to be interested in. They're baseline things we're always going to be interested in, the conversations around family, like the themes are the same, but how we're talking about them, how we're connecting the dots to the past. I'm very keen right now on looking at the lessons we can take from the Reconstruction era and how that is going to be connected to our present day and future, what learnings we can take from that in either fiction or nonfiction and have it as a strategy. So I'm not sure if I fully answered your question, but you can follow up with me.
Okay. All right. So as it stands right now, will the mission, as I'm listening to the mission of Amistad, is very much like the mission of the Center for Black Literature, uplifting and showcasing, Black literature, across the spectrum. So that was very lovely to hear. We have to find some kind of way to have a partnership with Amistad on
Yeah,
a different level.
yeah.
So as a vice president, what does that mean? It's a lovely title. What are some of the things that you're actually responsible for?
Again, setting the direction, right? Setting what we want to fill the lineup, the list of books with going forward, setting how we work with things like the trust, the Zora Neale Hurston Trust, and publish Zora's works or uplift Zora's backlist and storytelling. I work with our marketing and publicity teams for how we engage all the different authors. We have a core team of 4 editors on our team, but we are able to pull in, we're sit within the Harper One group at Harper Collins, which is 4 different imprints. The mission statement for the 4 groups as a whole is publishing for the world that we want to live in, which is, again, one of the reasons why I felt this was a space for me to be in. So I'm able to pull from 3 or 4 editors that are under other imprints within our group and have different specialties, different expertise and backgrounds to either acquire and or edit for our list. And they all come to me and we talk about what's coming in, what they're seeking, what they're looking, what they've heard, and how it will fit on the list. So between myself and our publisher, Judith Kerr, deciding, yes, we want that for Amistad, how will it go out into the world? So even if I'm not the one editing it, or I'm overseeing all the titles on the list and how they're being published, how they're being positioned in the market and with sales, and then also going out and being in the face of it and managing the profit and loss statement. We'll talk a little bit about that as well, the P&L for both the books and for the imprint.
Okay, so you could, yeah, go ahead, talk about that.
So one of the things I want to, when I mentioned before about talking to people about the difference between being a writer and being a published author, I want everybody to always remember, A, I want you to write whatever you want to write. Like write what you are called to write. That is a calling part. If you want to be a published author, also keep in mind that that's a business. We'll go through some of the other pieces that I want you to think about, but each editor that in mainstream publishing is carrying a profit and loss statement for each book. So that goes to the advance that is given because I love this book. I love you as an author. I know exactly where it can go. I know there's an audience for it. I can't wait to get out in the world. So I'm going to give you this amount of money because I think we're going to sell this amount of books. And at the end of the day, if you don't sell as many of those books as an author, as an editor, as a someone involved, I'm super happy that we got it out in the world. I'm glad that we've done the editorial work, but there's still also a profit and loss statement that has to be considered. And I say that because I want people who want to be published authors and have a career as a published author to know that and keep it in mind. It's not a barrier. It makes you more insightful and more strategic as you go forward. I want us all to win, and I want everyone's books to earn out
Yes.
because it stays it stays with you whether you go from one publishing house to another publishing house. The track record is what you'll hear that often. The track record on your book, everyone in the industry will be able to know how much it's sold. They may not know how much you sold it for and you earned for it, but they'll know how much it's sold. So it gives them a sense of how much the next book is going to get you, how much this is going to happen. Not a barrier. It's business. And that's a part I just want us to be comfortable with. I'm doing the writing. And then I know that there's an audience for this writing. So now that I have this other hat, that's the business hat and how to deal with that. So that has been something it's been interesting because we are so as a community as writers, it's a precious thing. It's personal in many regards. There's a literary community. We're cheering everyone on editorially, and then there's still a business component, which can be a tricky thing to straddle. And
Yes,
Donna.
certainly is. That is for sure. So, in terms of, the publishing industry, how can the publishing industry better support and promote the work of Black women authors and professionals?
As a whole, I mean, it's multifold. I think it's the work within, right? You have to see it and understand the audience, right? The more diverse it is within houses and when I say within the houses, not just on the editorial side, but in sales and marketing and all the different parts of the process, the more you're able to see the possibility in each of the books. We don't need them to be the next author the same. You don't need to publish the same thing. You need to be able to see the opportunity in something you've never seen before, the opportunity in building out authors or how valuable each of the collective voices are, that we're adding on to this. And so I think the main way we can do that is by continuing to add into the infrastructure, but then having the conversations where we know how we can connect people. We can give insights like I try to do. I can make connections. I like almost every day I'm having conversations with aspiring authors or people in the space about finding an agent. What's a good way to do that? How do you see what publishing houses are for you? Because not a lot of people understand what an imprint is you just want to get to Harper Collins. You don't know that there's necessarily multiple spaces within Harper Collins that you could be at, different kinds of authors,
Mhm.
what the focus is or what opportunities are even for some of the publishing programs. So if you don't necessarily want to be an author and editor, what are other spaces you can be within the the landscape that can help promote this? So
Mhm.
yeah, it it'll always come down to the people. I think there's as much as we want to institutionalize the process, it's going to always require the people within the walls and outside to agitate for things, but also to speak up within the house.
Hmm. So for um, a writer who is just starting out, they think they have a great project. What is the process for them within HarperCollins Amistad? Do you accept unsolicited manuscripts? Must they have an agent? How much must they submit in order to even get a good look, by an editor?
Generally, for us, you need an agent. And so many times when I have an outreach from an engaged author, I try not to read much. So, like usually, if I know someone, I'll get a synopsis and I'll try to maybe direct them or steer them to an agent. I think aligns with the kind of work that they're doing, or energetically sometimes even aligned, or just where I feel like they'll get on. And I'll try to steer them to someone so that because in large part, I mean, there's company policy to do that, but in large part, I think it's really important for you to have someone who's advocating and looking out for you. Some people, I see someone on the screen right now, I won't call her out, who uses a lawyer instead of a literary agent. But you
Mm,
do need someone who's looking at um, contracts in your best interest and understands the landscape and can maybe, and for me, it's also helpful to have an agent who can handhold because there's so many moving pieces to the process. And every first time author, everyone is nervous and concerned. Everything can feel like a hiccup there. You don't quite know, as much as we try to say what's going to happen, there are so many moving pieces. So having an agent who can help you write the proposal, there's that. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And then also, has their own connections, who can know which editors to go to around the industry, because if you're coming in blind, you don't know. You can just shoot a target at a broad stroke at a building. But an agent will have relationships and know how to reach out to the right agent, to the right editors in the right spaces, and get you in a conversation, get you a meeting, get someone to read it. Just going to say this for all the editors. Don't be worried if it takes a long time to get that feedback. We are inundated, but there is a process. And again, an agent helps you to navigate that process to get there. I'm trying to remember the top of your question, but yes, for us, we require you to have an agent and have that entree and the connection to help navigate the process, but it also removes a lot of the messiness that can happen. But I
hmm
also want to say that that's not the only way you can get published. I remember there's smaller presses, there are other spaces that are, while there's a lot of gatekeeping in general, there are a lot of different gates. So just keep in mind, this is the part where you do the research, you understand the lay of the land, you know who does what, you see what might actually be the best space for you for the work. Maybe not even for you in general, but for this particular work and potentially for the career that you want to grow out. Maybe it's a smaller press. Maybe it is something over here. Maybe it is one of the big five. Maybe it's a very specific imprint that you're very targeted on. But I caution you to widen the net and do a lot of research to get there.
So I'm hearing that, one of your major pieces of advice for aspiring writers and writers in general, even writers who have been published before, is the writing of the book itself is not enough. So you need to know, do your research, like you said. Don't just send things out if a house needs, and a house only accepts work from agents. You're sending your science fiction book to a house that only does romances. So basically doing a lot of research before you send your stuff out, to avoid, multiple disappointments as
Right.
opposed to, just a couple.
And yeah, that's exactly it. And it's a business where you get a lot of rejection. Like it's like actors, writers, you're gonna get a lot of no's for a number of reasons, none of which have to necessarily do with the quality of what you've written. And that's, again, something I want to remind folks not to get discouraged. It might take whatever time it takes, but it will be more streamlined if you can help yourself by having more information going into it. So you're not knocking up against walls you don't need to knock up against.
hmm One of the things that you mentioned a bit earlier, you talked about the proposal.
Mhm.
So, many beginning writers don't understand that you can't send in a 325-page manuscript and just hope that somebody is just going to just sit down and just, ooh, I'm just going to read this. So talk a little bit about what a proposal is, and what are
Mhm.
some of the key points that you'd be looking for in a proposal that would spark you to want to read the manuscript further.
And I don't think you, and one of the things I also say is that level setting that for a fiction work, you will need the full manuscript. It has to be completely written. For nonfiction work, you can submit on just the proposal. So the fiction, you'll need some sort of proposal to also, but you also need the full manuscript. Nonfiction, it is enough to have a proposal that also includes sample writing, sample chapters, so that we can see the writing. But every proposal has the overview. And again, it's really helpful to have this from an agent who can, format it, make it the way that we expect to see it, but has an overview of what the project is, a good, concise understanding that also draws you in. So I want to be clear that that overview shouldn't be a summary. It should also be evocative. It should still also make me want to keep reading. So the overview and understanding of who the author is, an understanding of what the market is like, and this means this is, Luster meets X, like it's this book beats that, or these are the competitive sets. This is where this book, if you publish it, it would sit on the shelf with these books, and preferably recent books. So there's recent sales, because this is what they will call the comp set. The titles that we're like, oh, this did really well. It is thematically or genre wise in line with what you're trying to sell, but it also did well. So it behooves you to not just look at how much you liked that book, but also how well that book might have done, because that is also important to us as we're assessing. Um, and then who you think that audience is. And the proposals also check off the things that I have to do internally to go in and get money for this book. I have to know why this book, why this author, who's going to buy it, how much do you think you're going to sell, why do you think you're going to sell that? That's where that comp set comes in, and where are we going to sell it? I need to be able to answer those questions. The proposal needs to be able to start that, have my interest peaked, right? Have that. It may not be where I stay. I might do some. I almost always will do more digging on the competitive set and the marketplace, and then there's also a conversation. But that has to show that level of forethought as well, that you understand it as a business. You or your agent understands it as a business and can come into that conversation with, okay, I'm interested now. Let's have a meeting. I'm going to read, I've read the sample chapter if we're talking nonfiction. So I get a sense of your voice in the work, how you show up in this, or how you're delivering the information. And I think, oh, I'm on board with that. Let's have a face-to-face meeting and see if we're aligned. If it's fiction, half the time we'll have notes, particularly like, questions around choices in the writing. Would you be open to changing X and Y? What is your process for your editorial process? How much are you willing to work with someone on the book? Because I love everyone. Everything's not going to land perfect. It's going to need some editing from there on out. They're not necessarily going to take your manuscript as is, no notes, we're going. That initial conversation has to be about here's what I'm thinking. What are you thinking? And then going from there. And then almost always well, let me not say almost always, often it comes down to the offer that's made, and if you're in a lucky position where you can have multiple offers, then you're in a catbird seat and you can choose based on both money and the editorial relationships that you want and the opportunity that you think that particular, and I'm going to say this, that particular imprint, that particular publisher, not necessarily that editor. And I say that's because editors are people. They move around. It's an unfortunate, I've had to handhold and have this conversation with many authors. It's a part of the business. So when you're assessing where you want to be, yes, try to have a connection with an editor who gets your work. I think, again, I have one or two people on this call I know I can see who have gone through the process of having the editor who acquired their work not be the same editor who published the work in the end, who someone else might have inherited, but then you have a new relationship. But it's about the imprint in the house because it's the house backing it, the imprint backing it. I'm not giving you money out of my pocket. They're giving you money, right? There's an expectation from the broader space that this book is worthy and is going to go out into the world, meet its audience, and we're all going to be happy. So whether that editor is there or not at midway or at the end of the process because of their own lives or whatever else is going on, that house, that imprint is behind the work, and that's the place you need to see. Oh, I want my book to be published here, no matter what.
Mhm, mhm. Okay. So, I have some more questions. Obviously, I have a lot of questions. But there are some questions in the chat that I want to make sure that we have an opportunity to address. And also, just as a reminder for all of the folks that are listening, because there's a bunch of people here. If you have a question, please put it in the chat, and we're going to try to make sure that we get to as many of them as we can before we end at 4 o'clock. So one of the earlier questions was, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're saying the volume of sales track record is public information to all in the publishing industry?
Yes, there's a service that we basically all have access to that can go and I can check to see how a book that was published not with us, how it's sold. I'm not sure, it's not necessarily the full number of, there's lots of wiggle room, let's say, for some of the details, but there's reported numbers that are gathered and can be accessed
Hmm.
across the industry.
Okay. And you were saying that those numbers sort of follow you. So what if, for example, you have a author whose track record is sort of mediocre, but the project that they have presented to you, you just see stars. How far would a publisher be willing to go for an author whose track record prior may not have been where they would like it to be?
It's a conversation. It's a lot of, again, a lot of the work I do and other editors do internally is talking up the book and getting other people excited enough to get the money. It is not, it's not like it's a no. It does moderate the level. And one of the ways I try to overcome that is if I can't go as high as I might like to, or that even an author might be expecting, I go as high as that P&L, and that's a straight finance Excel spreadsheet sort of conversation, right? This you give this much, and it gets to here, but what's a reasonable expectation? And you get to as much as I can do, and I build in bonuses. I build in like, okay, here's what I can give you. And just as an aside, so because I know this is not necessarily public information for people who haven't already gone through it, the advance you're given is not given all at once. It's broken up and split up into a number of different pulse points Some is given to you on a signing of your contract. Some is given to you the moment that the publisher accepts your work, which can be, a year to 18 months down the line. And then some is given to you when the book is published. So that's been I know that's not something that everyone always understands. So I just want that to also factor in, even if it's a big payday, it's a very spread out big payday, which, is just how publishing works. But I build in bonuses so that if I can't get what I think it will get, what I think it should have, maybe because for the amount that I think it will sell, I put in a bonus that says, if it does get to here, you get this much more. So
Mhm.
that's one of the ways we can account for uh, books that come in that we love and have high hopes for, but the author might come with a track record that's just needs some overcoming.
Okay. All right. That makes sense. Um, Here's another question from the chat. From the business side for writers, do you recommend that writers submit their own marketing plan to an agent editor when pitching a book?
I think if you have an agent, you talk with the agent about that plan. It should be like you shouldn't have a plan. You should have an idea generally, and that's the conversation when you're in the process of selling the book and you're talking with the editor um, about what the house might do, how will we support your book when it goes out. And like Amistad and most of us have dedicated marketing and publicity teams, right? So um, they will formulate a plan, but they're because they have industry knowledge and expertise. But if you are the expert in your space, we're always pulling in the author for additional insights. Are there like conferences that we're not aware of that we think we should, or conferences and or organizations that we should lean into doing some marketing with, because that is a passionate, engaged group that would be buying the book or that might bring you to a conference or that, so there are expertise that the author should be able to help inform the marketing plan. But at least for the bigger houses, we're not going to take your marketing plan. We're going to help it inform what we will do.
Oh,
And
okay.
that should be a conversation with your agent as from the outset.
hmm hmm Um, and another question from the chat. Are there any challenges or opportunities that you see in the publishing world today that impact Black women more than writers of other identities?
I mean, I think it's always a challenge across when you're not the dominant, main identity. It's always going to be a challenge. I'm not sure that I see it more for us. I think we can navigate it. I do. I think there's ways to get at it, but I think it's across the board, and I think we still have a lot of challenges to go overcome in that space. I don't know that there's one area where it's more so than another, and I don't know that it's one um, identity over another. I think there's lots of challenges for queer identities as well. There's overlapping identities. There's the multiracial identity that, depending on what the lens is, can be a challenge. That's another space where people expect one particular, there's for each of our identities, there's an expectation that there's one narrative. So I'm always trying to counter. And that's one of the things I'm really focused on. That we're not. It's not a monolithic Black experience. It's not a monolithic Black lens. There are multiple lenses and narratives that we're supposed to be able to incorporate. So I can't say that it's just one, or that we're one over the others,
Okay.
which I
Um,
understand others might.
yeah. Let me see. There are trying to follow the line of questioning here. There's one question here. I don't know, not familiar if Amistad does this, but is the process the same for children's books, both fiction and nonfiction? I'm assuming that Peggy means whether or not in terms of submission? Is the process the same?
I can't say. I don't know. I will say that. I don't know. I don't work in children's. And that if there's someone who is interested, I can either point them in direction or get an answer from our children's team to be sure. So I don't want to steer anyone wrong.
Mhm.
I won't even speculate.
Okay, fair enough. Um, okay, once
But
a
do
book,
follow up with me if there's a further question. I can follow up with someone.
okay, great, great, thank you. Once a book is published, what can Black authors do to increase our book's visibility in the market and hopefully increase sales? And I think that, thank you for that question, Monica. I think that's really a great question because, going from my own experience, I know the difficulty that Black writers in particular, Black writers across the board, women, men, anything in between, have a more difficult time in the marketplace than our counterparts. So, what can Black authors do to increase our books' visibility? And what does Amistad do in terms of placement um,
Yeah.
with Black books?
Yeah, that is, and that's the part of what we do internal the building and getting people excited is working with sales to increase the distribution. So that's the part that nobody sees beforehand. When you're wondering why the book isn't here, what we do is to drum up business from our sales team to booksellers on how much their like Barnes and Nobles is taking, or certain independent bookstores. Each booksellers are in either regional or they have very targeted sales reps, and having those sales reps sell in that's part of why it takes so long to have a book, because there's the co-writing portion and then there's the behind the scenes getting it into distribution portion. By the time anyone's seeing it out in the world or seeing advertisements for it, we've already been doing 6 months to a year's worth of work getting it put together, but then getting all the documentation. There's a million different steps for them to be able to take it out to the booksellers and the buyers for each of the retail sites to get as many as possible. And then when we find out if Barnes and Noble's taking X thousands, we don't know how many they decide where across the country it's going to be. Generally, it helps when we're also targeting an author's regionality, very big in the South, very big over here. Generally, they'll end up with more placement in that targeted area. But we're just trying to get them to buy as many and have as many on hand as possible to meet what we believe to be an expected demand. And then once it's out in the world, we are doing all the marketing and trying to get as much publicity as possible, trying to get the author on as many places, either on screen, on radio, on any podcast, on any moment to get to raise awareness of the book. Raising the awareness comes after making sure it's on hand in as many places as possible. That's the work that we always try to do, is getting the distribution numbers higher and higher, especially when we see an opportunity.
Yeah, yeah, distribution. That's always very interesting.
Mm.
It's
Yeah.
just that in talking with authors who are relatively well known, it gets very discouraging when you go into a major store and ask for a book that you know should be there. And
Hmm.
we don't have any copies, but we could order one for you.
Yeah,
Um, that's discouraging. So,
that's part of the work. Yeah,
yeah.
it's part of the work. It's part of the again, part of why I think it's important for the industry and for publishers to infuse diversity, not just in our editorial team, but across different functions within the business, is because that bringing that lens will help bring increased understanding of why this book needs to be, you need to get 20 more copies. Okay, like smaller places are not getting hundreds and thousands of copies, but
Mhm,
understanding where things need to be positioned and seen. That is a conversation that we're having constantly throughout cross-functional teams all the time. So the more people who can be speaking the same language or understand the opportunity around books that don't necessarily look like them or not don't appeal to them, the better.
Hmm. Okay. Very good. I'm trying to see, what do I want to do? Do I want to ask the group questions, or do I want to ask mine? So I'm going to go back because I want to make sure
Mhm.
that our listening audience gets an opportunity. Um, One more. Okay. So this is from R. Bernard. Given our socio-political climate, is it a particularly difficult time, or is it a great time to be trying to publish books in patois dialect Caribbean writing for writers?
I actually think anytime's a great time. It always comes down to the writing, right? It's about how engaging it is. I'm like I was born in Trinidad. I love anything that gives me a little flavor. If you're pulling me in, it's not something that needs to be overcome. You're setting up a reader. It's how well that book can set up the reader. So I don't think that one's dependent on the socio-political climate. There are other kinds of writing that might be a little more dependent on the socio-political climate, but I don't think that one is. I think that just there's an opportunity depending on the writing
Mm-hmm. Okay. All
and the
right.
story.
And this is from, oops, popped over. This is from Cherry Woods. Hi, Cherry. What makes a debut manuscript or author stand out to you at Amistad? Are there specific qualities, themes, or even platform elements that make you want to take a chance on a new voice?
So it'll depend on fiction, nonfiction, right? For nonfiction, the author has to have some sort of expertise and they have to be answering a question or solving a need. You know, is there what they're bringing and their expertise married with how they present it, you know, both on the page and how they can articulate it to a crowd. So I'm always, yeah, sometimes we're looking at the author as a commodity themselves. Can I send you out on TV to talk about this book? And I feel great, like go, you know, maybe with a little training and talking, but you know your subject so well and can engage. If you've engaged me, and I think you can engage a full room, that's a home run, right? That is worth pushing forward with. And with a fiction author, it's the story. It is always in the writing. I know a lot has been made about platforms, and I just want to address that a little bit because I know everyone's like, "Well, I don't have 100,000 followers." I think platform goes beyond just your social media following, and it could be a relatively small with a passionate or with the right engaged audience who is connected on what you're talking about. You know, they're going to buy your book. A lot people have realized that you can have a million followers, but if they're not buying books, it doesn't matter.
Right.
If they're just gonna like you because you're talking about your pants, you know, or whatever, if they're not following that journey, whatever your new conversation is. So just as an aside, because people think that we're only looking at celebrities or people who have high numbers, that's not necessarily the case. People who have Substacks or newsletters or any other space where there are people who know you, want to hear your voice, want to hear your take on something, will show up and buy your books. That's what I'm looking for in terms of platform. That
Hmm.
said, you don't necessarily have to have a big platform. You can be a debut, you can be someone who we get a lot of debut authors who have come in through MFA programs or who already know other writers. So your writer community can also be your cred, your entree, your platform, because you're coming in with people who endorse you kind of as a person, but really endorse you as a writer.
Hmm.
And so just keep that in mind as well. And I've already forgotten what the original question was.
Oh, that's fine. I think she was asking about debut authors and how you stand out, and those types of things. So I think you hit it on the mark. Here's a question from Norma. Early, so this is going back to sort of the opening, your opening and your introduction. Early on, it was mentioned that you had some experience at Audible. It would be great to have more Black women narrating books. How closely aligned are those sectors? Not sure what you mean by that, but
I'm not sure. We do have, I mean, there are quite a number of Black women narrators who are amazing. My Bonnie Turpin is my queen. I love her beyond. Um, and there are many others. There are other ways to, I don't know if Audible still has it. I think they still have, I can't remember what it's called, but an avenue for becoming their self-published line also has an opportunity to try to become a narrator. So
mm,
there are ways to become a narrator, but it's very much like acting. You have to have a reel, you have to be able to perform and not just read. There's a performance aspect, but I think there's always an opportunity for more. We have maybe five standout big names, and then I'm sure there are plenty more, but it depends on, if you have a personal interest, there are avenues and lanes.
okay, very good. And another question from Norma. Um, have we talked about those of us who may love to read and write, as how you started off, Abby,
Hmm.
and have an appreciation for literature, but are not necessarily trying to be published, which is you. How can we support published or those aspiring to be published authors? So
I
you're
like more,
not an
yeah.
author, um,
Hmm.
you're not an author, you don't have aspirations to be an author, but you love to read, and you love literature in general. So how can those people help to support writers?
I think Morgan's answer in the comments is right on the money. Like the target is to be as supportive as possible on digitally, on all the platforms where you can read and leave reviews, purchase, but more importantly, show up for all the books, right? So yes to Bookstagram, and yes to TikTok. There's a lot of people discovering older books, discovering new books that way, and there's a passionate, engaged round robin of our ability that's always supportive. But share it, read it, show up for it. Honestly, we're publishing books because we believe there's an audience, and we need that audience to show up all the time so that they can't say, well, no one bought it. So if you want to support Black authors, show up in the digital spaces like Goodreads, Storygraph, Bookstagram, TikTok. Show up with your dollars in your pockets and buy the books, or show up in the stores, show up at events. That's another thing. So, it's a challenge for authors these days to get into some bookstores for events and signings. They literally will ask, can you deliver 40 people? Will 40 people show up for you? We
Hmm.
want to be able to say yes almost all the time, for every author and more, and hopefully more people, but show up and pay attention to their feeds, pay attention to where they're going to show, patronize Black bookstores. Shout out to Sisters Uptown in Harlem. They're places where they have legacy, and they need the audience to continue to show up for them.
Hmm. Yes, I'm so glad you mentioned Sisters Uptown because they're struggling and they need our
Mhm.
support.
Yeah.
Um, LaRonda has a question. Are there suggestions that you have for moving from self-publishing to being traditionally published?
Okay, I know I got someone on the line who knows about that, but it is networking. All right. So this is the business. Again, there's the writing hat and there's the business hat. The business hat, this is your business. You have to talk to many people. There's going to be a lot of no's. It is something that could take, I keep looking at someone in my side there. It took 10 years of a relationship we built 10 years ago that
Mm,
led to a book coming up next year. So there's a bit of selling yourself. It's uncomfortable for writers, particularly. Don't think of it as selling yourself. Think of it as building community. Talk to more people within the industry. You know, I can't always say yes, but I often say yes, or like, yes, we'll talk. And it might be a month and a half from now for like a half an hour on Zoom. but talk to as many people as possible. Show up at events that are public or industry. Reach out, try to make connections. Don't take silence as a bad thing. Again, lots of busy people who are interested, but most people are interested in helping pull other people along.
One question is, what is trending now? Because you say that the publishing industry is like looking, is supposedly forward thinking. And they're trying to project, what are people going to be reading this time next year, for example. So what's
Mhm.
trending now? What do you see trending?
There's still a lot. Well, there's not something that's trending that I can say is necessarily for us. There's lots of spaces where for the longest time, a lot of thing is still going on. There's the romantasy space, right,
Yes,
where it's a bit of romance, but also fantasy and forward looking. But then there's a lot of industry buzz around sort of Japanese inspired writing in books that are sort of take on that aesthetic as well. So, and I just want to correct that what I said. I didn't say the industry is necessarily looking forward. We are. We're
you
trying
are.
to future
Sorry.
cast. I'm trying to future cast on what our target audience, what our people, what us as a community, and by extension, those that don't look like us but can always benefit. We're very much in a little bit in the FUBU, like for us, by us, but everyone welcome because I think it'll resonate or there's something to be learned. But what will serve us? What will entertain us? And I like fiction for the sneaky entertainment that sneaks in some education that you would if you wouldn't necessarily pick up the history book, but you're being entertained by a historical romance or something along those lines. You're picking up things that are helpful for moving forward. So, and what kinds of nonfiction can equip people for the world that we're going to be living in.
Okay, thank you, thank you. Um, as a leader in the industry, how do you personally strive to champion the voices and achievements of Black women in publishing?
Um, in the large and small ways, a lot is done quietly or one to one. The affirmations, the I see you, this like the congrats on things that I have nothing to do with, just so someone is looking, the offer to make connections, the taking a chance. And I can't champion every book internally, but I'm always looking, and if it's not for me, I'm pointing it to someone else, and I'm trying to find connections. So it's again for me, well, always about community in some respect and building it, supporting it, one to one groups are showing up here like this when I can.
Yes, and we are so very grateful that you did. I'm so
Yeah,
excited you were the
okay.
first person.
Thank you.
One last question because we're actually going to run out of time in a second. Um, how important, especially in the times that we're in, which you touched on at your in your opening, the difficult times that we're in, the struggle to sort of erase our voices, erase us just in general from the arts as much as possible. What is Amistad up against at this particular stage? And how important is diversity and inclusivity in the publishing industry, particularly the representation of Black women's voices and stories, especially during these times?
The short answer to the back part of that question is very important. Like it will never be important, and we have to the legacy and the direction setting, the example of folks like Toni Morrison, which again I have to give a shout out to this book that I'm so very happy that we have on the list,
Oh,
called Toni at Random, which talks about her years as an editor at Random House. As a side note, another part of why I said pick the house, I didn't acquire this book. Tracy Sherrod acquired this book. I did,
see.
I then did the editing on the book and put it out. Like there's a continuum that I want everyone to just continue to be aware of, that there's a continuum about doing the work. We're all handing off to each other in some way or not. So that is why it's important for us to have multiple. It can't just, it's not one of those, there can only be one, there can only be five. There has to be so many more of us throughout all the houses to be able to tag team on different ways and different things. And again, in other parts of the organization, not just as editors as well. So there's that. Top of your question though, I forgot now. I was going to answer it really quickly though. What is Amistad up against? We've
Um,
got full throated support. Like I am up against marketplace and them saying, the market saying that this has been hard to sell or that's been hard to sell. Internally, what's part of my job is making sure we continue to have internal support, and we have tons of that. Like I get no backlash because that's part of my job, is making sure everyone's aware and doing the selling inside. So I'm up against the world, but we're built for that. So
yes, we are we not? Yes, we are. Well, thank you so very much. I think I tried to answer all of the questions that came through in our chat. I want to thank all of our participants for being here, for listening. Thank you, Abby, for kicking us off with our summer series. I think you answered a lot of questions, gave people some hope and some insight. And before we go, could you let us know, for those of us who love reading, because you should be loving reading if you're here, how can we find out about titles coming out of Amistad?
one major way is to follow our Instagram. Please follow our Instagram. We have, again, part of the thing we've done, I'm so proud of, that we've sort of helped really invigorate our marketing team and I love social for voice and building community. And I think what we're doing on our Instagram right now is really fostering and building that community and finding really good ways to pull in our authors and connect them with the audience, and you getting a foresight of books that are coming out. We just put up a reel, I think yesterday, about a book coming out in December called Bloom How You Must, about Black women's self-care. We've got
Mm.
It's Me They Follow from Janine Cook coming out in September. We've got Black, White, Colored, which talks about a little known part of American history, to one of the massacres. If you only think about Tulsa during when we talk about massacres of Black communities, there's so
That's not
much more
good.
for you to learn. So
Yeah,
there's lots of that, and all of those things come through on our social. So it's the easy touch, low touch way of staying abreast.
very good. Thank you. Thank
So
you, Abby West,
thank
the
you.
Vice
Thank you for having
President,
me.
Editorial Director at Amistad, Harper Collins. Thank you all for being here. This is our first of a 4-week series that the Center for Black Literature is hosting. Next week, we will have Marva Allen, and Marva has been in the industry for a very long
Very
time.
long time.
She is the CEO of Human Books. She runs her own independent publishing. So please join us next Thursday, same time, same place, 3 o'clock here on Zoom to talk with Marva Allen. And everybody have a safe, blessed, and enjoyable rest of your day. Abby, we'll be in touch. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
All
Take
right.
care, everyone. Thank you for having me.
All right.